So welcome, I'm Joshua De Lisle, the designer blacksmith, and the first thing I want to do is say a massive thank you to my wonderful, fantastic subscribers. It's because of your investment in me that I'm able to develop more patterns such as the stag and many more yet to come. Right, and with every new sculpture that I do now, I'm going to put a limited time discount offer in the description, so do check that out. And firstly, I recognise that this video is very long, and so I split it into chapters for each and every stage of this build. That should be below also in the description. So before we begin, I just want to mention a couple of very important things. If you choose to purchase my designs, the download link will appear straight after purchasing. So there's no email sent, or there shouldn't be any waiting, it should be instant. If it was missed, however, do just drop me a message through Etsy and I'll be able to find your account and send you the link. Now, what you will get in your download package is the PDF for manual cutting. It'll have information on all the things that you need, and it's really important to read thoroughly the quantities of each part that you'll want to make. Also included are DXF files. Now, DXF files are for CNC laser cutting or water jet cutting. You can't open those on just a normal computer. You need to have CAD software to open it. So it's really important that you set to save, not open, when downloading. Now, I've done a few videos on cutting out the patterns by hand. It's quite simple. On the PDF, there should be an option to print to scale, to 100% scale. That will give you many pieces of paper that you then have to sellotape or glue together, depending on your preference. And then you can cut those out by hand. Now, you can use those paper templates to make a first copy first, so you can see how everything comes together. So you basically build it out of paper first, or you can basically lay them on top of the piece of steel and draw around them with like a Sharpie or something. And then, because we're only using 1mm to 1.5mm of steel, a set of metal shears like this one will work fantastic and will reduce the cost. I've put a link for some metal shears in the description that are very affordable. So I'm going to be using a MIG welder for this, and specifically I'm using a 12% mixed gas and 0.8mm wire. So I'm thinking of making a separate video on how to weld these together using either a stick welder or a TIG welder as well also. Let me know in the comments section if that is something that you're interested in seeing. And now, just before we begin, I'm just going to point out some very interesting details, and that is I've put some animations within the video, and I would say take great care at looking at how those pieces are formed before moving on to the next stage. You will notice that on mine I didn't keep the top of the head flat enough. That should be really flat if you look in the animation, and you'll save yourself a whole load of bother if you pay more attention to it. There's also a little detail in the cheeks that you'll notice where I kind of bend it that way instead of in that way. But anyway, have a good watch, and if there are any issues or things that are unclear, just please let me know in the comment section. All in all, I'm looking forward to hearing your feedback and looking forward to doing more. Let's begin. Okay, I've decided to begin with part A. This is the wall fixing plate, and we're going to pay close attention to the fixing holes here. They are so you can locate it onto a wall and they'll lock in place onto the fixings like so. So making sure your bench is clean and flat, we're going to place part A on the bench like so. Now this is optional, but I'm just going to lay a piece of angle iron on top and clamp it down. And this will just make sure that the plate is flat and secure when I'm putting on the next pieces. So you don't necessarily have to make it in this order, but I've decided that the next part I'm going to put on is part H. Now going along part H to the very pointiest edge, we're going to start at the very bottom of part A, and we're going to attack it almost 90 degrees where the points touch each other. So as we begin to tack it round, we're going to follow the contours of the shape, and it'll end up almost folding back on itself like this, We're going to start off 90 and it will bend to this position. So all the parts will fit with an open corner. And if I just use these pieces of steel here for an example. Now what I mean by an open corner is where the two edges of the material meet like that. So most of everything we'll make, it will be like this. So with part H, I'm going to lay it on top. I'm going to bring the tips to meet each other, just keeping on checking it, and then I'm going to add a little tack, just 10 mil in, not on the very edge because we've got the other parts to fit in there, but just 10 millimeters inwards, like so. So now that I've got my first tack in place, I'm going to start bending the material around, keeping these corners together, and do a tack maybe every 30 millimeters or so. And I've decided to move my bracing bar up a little bit just to stop that corner from peeling upwards. So I'll tack the rest and then we'll do the other side. Okay, that's the first part added now, and you can see I use some tongs and some stiff pliers to just help in twisting this in. Obviously the thinner you go, the easier it is to build, but it might be more challenging to weld later. So I'm going to unclamp this, flip it round, and then do the same on the opposite side. So even though I designed this, I'm still learning the process of putting these together myself. So what I've done is I've just re-established the plate to just hang off the edge of my workbench here, and that way I can bend things past ground level and tack as I go along here. And what I'm aiming to do is just to keep things flowing smoothly, so if there are any sharp dinks or dents, I'll polish those out as I go along. So as you can see, we're going to keep part A nice and flat, and as we go we want to try and keep some sort of symmetry going, making sure everything bends in the same way. So next we want to add part B. Part B will go in there like so, and notice how the transition happens on part B here. That is where that little corner is there, is exactly where these edges will stop. So these actually want to continue to twist this way until they're almost 90, and what you do is as you twist these, they'll want to curve upwards, and you'll want that. So you've got two things going on. You've got to twist it 90 degrees so it's flat like this, and then it will curve upwards, and then you'll want part B to fit that same curve. So I'm just going to use these tongs here to kind of help me. So here you can see these ends, they're now twisting kind of parallel to each other, which is what we want, and it's starting to curve nicely at the back here in that plane. The only thing we need to do is to just kind of pry things apart just a little bit. So you've still got a bit of bending left to do here. But what I think is if I put a slight curve into part B, when I put it in the back there, I can kind of pry things apart and they'll marry together nicely. So eventually you should end up with something looking like that. And on part B, this is where part H finishes, right on that little corner there where there's a slight transition. So as we keep on adding parts, everything will stiffen up considerably. So my advice would be not to be too tack heavy. I think this is as maximum as you want to go at this stage. These could even be a bit further apart maybe. And that would just give you a little bit more play and movement as you bring these parts together. So as we progress to this next stage, how flat it lies on part A is actually quite crucial. But as you can see, as we start putting tension and bending things around, it's not going to stay flat for very long. So one thing you can do is, depending on what your weld bench is like, you could tack a bar onto the back to keep that rigid. Or you can use the screw holes here to bolt it down onto something. I'm actually going to tack weld it to this plate. So I'm going to start at the back here, and then I'm going to bring this front down, and that should bring everything together nicely, ready for the next part. There, like so. That holds everything nice and stiff. I can bend and move things I know that part A, once everything else is tacked together, will now remain completely flat. And if I need to move things around, I can actually unbolt this plate, which is quite handy. Okay, so the next part I'm going to introduce is part I, and it looks like this, in this shape. And part I will actually join with the other part I in the opposite side, mirroring each other, and this is going to be the front of the stag. And the way these attach is the longest part here, this side, will begin at the bottom of part A again, and it will wrap itself round, and these tips will finish just here at the top of part H. So as you can see, I'm starting at the very tip, and I'm going to start gradually bending these over and around. So these tips, I'm actually just going to bend outwards ever so slightly, like that. That will give me enough room to complete the bend. You see how I've just bent those outwards, just like that. So now as I bring these down, I've got room here to close that gap up. So that's what you should have so far. So always check for symmetry. Make sure everything's kind of like parallel, the same angles to each other. So it's worth noting, everything bends on the flat position. If I was to take these pieces off now and flatten them out, they should go back to the original. And this should make the fabrication simple enough that you don't need any specialist tools. I'm going to do this completely by hand with nothing more than my welder. But we'll see how we go anyway. So now I've put everything in the upright position, mainly so you guys can see what I'm doing now as I'm going to start working on the face. And I've done it very simply just by clamping it to a block that I've got at the back. So the next part I'm going to introduce is part C. C is going to go right in here, so we need to pull apart the eye pieces a moment. And you'll notice on the eye there's like a transition point just here, where there's just a slight corner, and that will align with the edge of part C there. So I'm going to start again at the very bottom, work my way doing both sides, and at the same time I'm going to try and pry part I apart slightly. So starting at the bottom, you could see to pry things apart I just used a simple screwdriver, and that just enabled me to get things in. Where there was a bit of a gap after welding it with the screwdriver in, I was able to just tap those tacks back together. So squashing the tacks closed that gap up that was left by having the screwdriver in there. Well, that's come out quite nice. So I believe next we should introduce part D. Now D is going to be like the jawline of the stag's head, and this will attach onto part C here. What we're going to do first though is we're just going to bend part D just a little bit. The idea with this is that your pre-bending doesn't have to be accurate, but it will help with as everything pulls together. As you can see, the more things are off, the harder it is to get together. But just putting a little bend in there will just help enormously. So in this instance, I'm just, see where the roundness at the end of the jaw here kind of dips in just a little bit. Where that dip is, which is about there, kind of like a third of the way along. I'm just going to put a slight bend. And I'm actually going to use my tongs here and just help that. So it's nice and gradual, just from the edge there over to there. And it doesn't need a lot, just about that much will do. And now if we go along about a third of the way here, I'm going to do the same, bending in the opposite direction. So just very gradual. Doesn't need to be hugely accurate. I'm just eyeing this myself. But a nice graceful curve like that is all you'll need. So when we attach part D on, instead of an open corner like we have done on previous things, I'm just going to lap mine so it's as close to the transition on part I as possible, because that's where the rest of the frame will come from. So I'm going to actually lap it over rather than have an open corner. And just for a reference, what you want to do is angle the bottom of D roughly in line with the point on part C. So part C here, we're going to lap just over the top so it's close to part I. This edge we're going to have roughly in line with there, and I'll attach that on now. So what I've done with mine is I've just put 5 tacks across here, simply because to get the welder underneath there could be a bit messy, so I've done it enough that it will be strong enough to stay as it is without needing to do a weld underneath, but there's some flexibility still if I want to pry it off. So roughly in line with the point of part C, very slight S shape, and the next part will come along here, and you can see the jaw line is going to gracefully curve around like here, like so. Right, the next part I'm going to put on is part G, which is obviously the jaw, and as you can see there's quite a bit of shaping that still needs to go into this. We need to put it on here like so, and it's going to curve around and out like this, if you see what I mean. These very edges of part G will also align with the ends of part I. This little divot there, that little kind of transition piece, will come to the edge of part C and D, and the middle, the very point in the middle of the balancing point of G will come right on the very tip of part D, like so. So I think the first thing I'm going to do is actually shape the very tip, the very middle of part G, just like this. I'm going to bend it by hand, like so, and I'm almost bending it in half, if you see what I mean, creating a kind of hollow here. So what it happens is it bends in half, but then it bends outwards again ever so slightly. So I'm just going to bend them there and there. You can see just either side, not too much, but there, that's starting to look a bit more reasonable. I might have overbent it slightly there. So that will come round. So it will self-correct itself as we put it onto the piece now. But I'm going to start from the middle and work side to side until I get my points at the very top of part I. Okay, so just trying to close up this gap here, I think what I need to do is release some of these tacks because they've kind of fixed this angle of approach. So if I can release these 3 tacks here either side, I can actually lift the jaw up ever so slightly, close this gap and bend everything to match in there perfectly. But this is the reason why we lightly tack first, because you will have to do this now and again. As things are coming together, you'll realise where stresses and things are happening, so you can release tacks as and when you need them. And so now I'm going to start again, and I'm going to lift the jaw up ever so slightly. I've bent the cheeks out as well. That'll give me plenty of room to move everything. If this isn't the right angle up here, you'll struggle to get this coming up, so you almost have to force this one down. So you may even want to nick some of these tacks here. Even just by scoring them, they'll be able to flex a little bit more and able to kind of flatten this top off and bring these cheeks back up to here as well. But just all I'd say is if you're going to use a hammer to tap things, just be gentle so you're not getting too many dinks and bumps. And we're looking for the flow of lines and not too many kind of ripples in the metal if we can get it. I'm going to introduce part J now, if you like. These are the kind of the main cheeks. As you can see, we've got a little corner-like part just here on part J, just down from the very pointy part. So we're going to index here. I think I'm going to start there as well, in that kind of recess of part G. We're going to finish at the top there where there's another recess, and then we're going to match the flow of part G down here. So you want to continue kind of twisting, just bending things until all of these line up kind of as best as you can. I've got a few gaps in mine. It's never going to be perfect, but if you can get it close to the line as possible, that will obviously help with welding. So we're now going to install part F, which is actually like the nose, if you like, and then it's going to go right here like so. So we're going to bend it to curve this jaw line here, and these edges will finish up attaching to part J. But the first thing that I'm going to do is make sure that it fits part E. And so you can see at the moment they don't quite match. So I'm just going to bend this in half ever so slightly, like that, and now you can see it matches part E a little bit better. So what I need to try and do is to keep this top part of part F this exactly as I've set it now, but the bottom I need to put a nice curve, so there's going to be a transition here. So I think the best way to do that now is to use either the tongs and a vise and start to manipulate this round, but keeping on checking the top that doesn't change so much. It's got to curve in a little bit, as you can see there. There's a bit of a round profile here, so that's got to still bend round ever so slightly. But this has now got to match your jaw here. This jaw might have to be hit with a hammer ever so slightly just to make it less of a pointed shape. I've got a slight point on mine, so I need to just kind of round that off. Right, so before installing part F, what I've done here is I've just brought part J in slightly to match the distance of part E. So part E will go here, and so you just want to bring those two parts in equally to match part E. So part E will go here, part F will slot in there. Now at the moment F doesn't match part E yet. You can see it's nearly there. But because I've got the bottom profile where I want it to be now, I'm going to tack this in only on part G. So I'm going to tack across here, and then with my pliers I'm just going to bring these top parts out to match the preset distance on parts J. So without moving parts J, because I know where they're meant to be, I'm just going to bring these tips of part F to match. And then just to confirm what I'm done, bring part E just to double check. So it's still got to come out a little bit. And that's looking more like it. Now there is actually a slight roll that needs to happen on part E, so don't expect it to be straight, you know, fitting flushly from this part, but get it as close as you can. I'm going to tack this now, and then I'm going to start bending part E over, as you'll see. Okay, so part E will eventually be joined with part B. But first, what you want to do is just shape it ever so slightly so it curves a tiny amount in that plane just to here, and then where you can see it bulbs out, it then kind of curves the other way. So I'm just going to use my tongs again, just to bend that part ever so slightly. And also part B, where it transitions here, that will also bend towards us to match it. I'm just going to use the tongs again. Going to bend down something like that. But I'm not actually going to join it yet. I think what I'd like to do is put the rest of the face in first, and then that will be the very last piece before we start putting the antlers on. So what I'd like to do now is install part M, which will go on like this. And you can see we've got a bit of shaping to do to J now, so it fits in this curve here, and also to part E, so it matches up there. So part M has a very slight curve onto it as well. You don't really want to touch this part here, that's quite delicate, the eye part. We're just going to do an ever so slight bend across the taper just there. So I think the first thing I'm going to do is just bend J inwards a little bit now. Get that kind of marrying up into this curve. Then I'll make sure it fits E and start welding everything together. So I'll start to put some light tacks on that. Now it's coming together nicely. And then I can start manipulating everything so it all comes together. Okay, so we're going to start working on the eye socket area now. And so we've got part N, that's going to go there like so. We've got this kind of almost flat side here and a curve at the front. And it's going to go not flat like that, but at an angle, very slightly. That angle will be dictated by the other two parts that will come on just now. So behind it is part L. Part L will go here, and it will have a slight dishing to it. It will curve in this plane. That will marry onto there. And then part K will go here. And part K will basically curve all the way around the eye socket like that. So part N will always remain flat. That won't change. So we could potentially tack weld part N straight on like so, on a very slight angle. I think you can almost use part K to kind of determine these 2 points here. That will indicate into the side of the socket here and to the top of the eye socket there. So there and there, those points will match. So you'll get a good idea of where the angle for part N will be. We'll get that tacked on and then we'll start shaping these to match, I think. Okay, so I'll put a bit of a curve now into part K. Just placing it on, seeing how it looks, taking it back to the vise. The main thing I'm concerned about is part N, part M and part K, how those three parts join together. part E will have to be adjusted to match afterwards. So leaving this all untacked for now, because when part L goes in, that will change everything up again. And so part L will go in here, and then you'll want to, wherever K then finally lands, part E will then join into it. So let's get part K tacked on first. Okay, so I've bent up part L ever so slightly. You can see it makes a slight S shape on this side, but these edges I've tried to keep as straight as possible. So I'm going to tack this on here now, and where I've overbent it I can just slightly peel it over and then match it with part E. Part K and part E can then come together as well also. Okay, so I'm going to work on the I next with part O. Now it's completely up to you, but you can leave the eyes open. Some people prefer that, some people don't. But anyway, if we take part O, just have a little look at it quickly. The way it should fit is the more bulbous side, if you like, is the top, and the longest point, which is kind of this side, is the back over here. So top, back, and that should index where you put it. But we're going to put a slight curve, so it's going to curve in this plane, and then we're going to flick the ends just out. If you're MIG welding it like I am, it won't matter so much, because once you've welded over it you'll lose quite a lot of detail. But if you're, say, TIG welding or tack, you know, TIG, tack only, you'll want to get everything fitting as neat as you can. So to make sure I've got space, the little tacks that I've got in the corners here, I'm going to grind those off now with a 1mm cutting disc, and I'll put some shape into this, and then you can see how I fit them in. So next I think we'll begin the ears, and so we're going to come off parts J and G. So part P connects to part J in this orientation, and part Q attaches onto part G in that orientation. So there and there, if you see how I mean. And instead of open corners, we're going to lap it again. So we're going to go just on top, making that flush, making part G flush with part Q there, and the same with part J and part P. We're going to tack those on, and then we'll bend them into position on the sculpture itself. So now that I've got parts P and Q joined to parts J and G, what you want to then introduce is part R. Now R goes at the top here, between parts P and Q. You might have to shape the head ever so slightly. I actually had to kind of squash my head a little bit just to open it up here, and that allowed me then to get parts R in place just there. So I'm going to lightly put some tacks either end of parts R, and then I can start bending everything in position. So I think you'll definitely need a stiff pair of pliers or a pair of tongs to do this, but I'm going to begin with just lightly bending P forwards, and so it kind of curls at the base here. Then I'm going to bring down part R to kind of match that curve. And now I've got to try and bring part Q to match the other two parts. So there'll be a lot of twisting in this. Q especially, I want to kind of curve over a bit like so. I think I want to get parts Q and P tacked together first. Sometimes it's worth over bending things and then pulling them back, and that allows things to meet at the very points. First tacks at the bottom, and then I'll make my way round. So you can see how this kind of piece twists up and around here, like so. The front just has this ever so slight curve into it. On the back, this piece just curves round, like so. So I guess the trickiest part is part R. The way that kind of flows, some people might struggle with. But yeah, she should start looking like a deer head. So as you can see in my tiny shed, we're running out of headroom, and so to do the antlers I've got to drop this now downwards probably another ½ a metre. Good girl. Alright then, this is arguably the most exciting part of the build. We're going to put the antlers on. So I'm going to begin with parts U. You'll notice with parts U, one side is slightly thicker than the other, and it also tapers down slightly on the tab area. Okay, so U is going to attach to part L at the front here, and we're going to lap it again, so not an open corner, a lap join. We're going to bring it to the front this way, and I'm going to put several tacks on the back there. And I'm just going to lean it forward ever so slightly. So before I put the other side on, I'm actually going to bend these two prongs forward, creating a bit of a U shape in this direction. So I'm going to bend those forward, like so. And the bend is quite acute, so you might want to use some stiff pliers or tongs again. But that'll do nicely for now. And now I'll put the other side on. So you might have noticed I had a little bit of misalignment at the front here. So all I did was just cut the tacks, break it off, and just brought it forward a little bit and just got it nice and aligned with the front of part E here. The next part we're going to add though is part T, and T attaches onto part R either side like this. Lapping again, I'm going to put tacks across there. I'll do both sides and then we'll start putting the next ones on. Okay, so the next part we're going to add is part Y. Part Y goes on the inside part here in this orientation. And then finally at this stage we're going to add part S, and S goes, as you can guess, right at the back there, like so. Right, so now I'm going to start bending parts T over to match the backside of parts S, and start then bringing parts U together and going around in a circle until all of these parts meet each other. So before I go any further at tacking these together, I've got the main kind of connection here to the head, just a few tacks in the inside. What I want to do now is introduce part W. This one is going to go on top like that, and so I want to make sure that as I'm tacking these I'm getting all three sides connected at the same time. So it's obviously going to index over here on part S and part Y. So to fit it there, I'm just going to bend it in the middle ever so slightly just to bring the top of the antlers up. I might bend this part out a little bit as well, just so I can get it indexed over there. Okay, I might also bend part S just away from me, just for now, just to give me plenty of room. And I'll get that in there. Yeah, so I think I'm going to get that corner tacked. I might just have a play it whilst I've got the room to get the tongs in, and just start manipulating part U a little bit more to get it to match this curve, this inside curve here. So I'll do that now. So I think I can honestly say that this part here has been the most trickiest part so far, because things seem to have been kind of twisted ever so slightly in one direction. Getting the points to marry up exactly, you have to kind of fight it a little bit. But it is coming together. Just some things that I thought I should let you know. So where I've got like tacks and stuff that aren't quite meeting, or places where there's quite a bump and I want to just kind of level things off, I've been using a piece of steel, very much like a panel beating dolly, just to give it a bit of resistance every time I go in. So at the moment I've got quite a big gap here where I've tacked it, and I just want to kind of beat that back into place a little bit. Just having a bit of resistance means that it moves where I want it to. So this could be a potential for someone to get frustrated at this point, but I need to bring this part of the antler down to meet this one, but really it's actually this one that needs to go up, but it's already connected with all the other parts. So it means it needs bending in very acute places for it to kind of go upwards, including at the back here. That needs to kind of flatten out that way, needs to kind of twist over this way. But now that I have kind of tack welded most of it together here, it's actually triangulated it quite a lot, and there's quite a lot of strength there. So if I kind of bring this part down and push against this one, they do kind of meet together eventually, and you can see where it needs bending. It needs kind of bending all the way back here. So I'm gonna push in the whole lot. So I can feel it bending on the back here. It's funny, isn't it? You want to get this over here, but where it's actually moving is the tacks on the back just there. So if I just push against that again. There we go. That's nearly met it now. In fact, that's pretty spot on. Yep. Right, I'll finish tacking that together then now. So that's this stage done. I thought I'd give you a bit of a zoom in, see how it's all working out for me so far. So next I'd like to add part V. Part V goes here, like so. But first we need to bend part T over quite a lot. These two parts, part T and part W, need to come together here and make almost like a V going directly 90 that way. So that means this part, part T, needs to make quite an acute bend. So I'm going to add a bend here, right down, and then bring it up like that. So I'm going to gradually bring these together until I think it's the right time to add part V. Okay, now I'm ready for part V, and I'm going to index it again, this corner into this corner, and then start to bring everything round. This might have to bend ever so slightly in the middle. I'm just going to do this by hand. There you go, just to create a little hollow here, and that will eventually make itself aligned with this bend here in part W. So I'm going to start indexing at the back here, making my way along part T onto part W, and then once I've brought it all the way to the tip, then I'll start to bring it together up here. So as you can see, I've tried to get it so I can see all the faces joining together nicely before welding. That gives me a good indication that when I do weld it, nothing's off. All the points kind of match up. So I'm confident to tack this up now. So now these are together, we might have to manipulate it a little bit so we can fit in part X. Now, if you like, this is the stag's left hand antler. So the way I orientate part X is you have the straightest point is the front part of the antler, the thickest point is the inside, and the curved point is the outside. Now, obviously, to get this to fit within, we're going to have to pre-shape this quite a bit. So I'm going to start by doing that by hand until we can fit it in nicely there, like so. Now this needs a bit more shaping now, but what I will do is make sure that all the points are near where they need to be whilst it's still loose, and then I'll probably tack it at the bottom and work my way up the sides. Right, okay, that's him all together now. So I think the hardest part is over. The welding, I think, is going to be the easy part. Probably the most enjoyable as well. So I'm probably going to go and look around it, make sure all the faces are nice and clean and free of bumps. I might have to open up some of the tacks and just re-close things back together if they weren't quite closed up enough. And checking the symmetry of the horns, maybe just giving it a bit of a tweak and a twist here and there. So if you've gotten to this stage, well done. If your assembly is fairly neat and put together, there's no reason why you couldn't just leave it as a tacked piece. You've got nice defined edges and it would look great without having to do anything else if you weren't confident, that is, in fully welding it. The other option is, of course, is to leave a little gap and then actually put some LED lights on the inside and see this thing glow from all the gaps. That would be awesome. I've seen that done before with some other sculptures. So I'm going to keep it on its base for now to fully weld it. I'm going to release it now, put it on here, and we'll cue a montage for welding it. So before I start welding, I'm actually going to sand down all the tacks. So when I do weld it, there's a nice continuous bead, which means a lot less for me to fettle later. And to do that, I'm using a 36 grit sanding pad. And just for some advice, I recommend that you wear some respirator equipment for this next process, both sanding and the welding. I'm actually trialling one that I've built. More on that in another video. There you go, this is fully welded now, and I would say that's the fun part over and done with. Now the not so fun part in actually grinding all these welds back. Now I've purposely left these quite bulbous, the welds, enough that there's material to grind back to create a nice hard edge, which is what I really like on these sculptures. You'll be pleased to know if your welding didn't come out so well, don't worry about it, you just do your best and grind the rest. But I will show you how to do the grinding part, because there's a technique, there's a special way of doing it, and it will really will make it come out looking a lot nicer. So some of my welds came out okay, some of them not so much, but really it's this next stage that makes it really important. Okay, so to really define all these edges that I've welded, this is my technique. I'm going to use these flat pads again. These are fantastic for getting a really flat, smooth finish. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow the face of each side. So I'm going to come this side first, and I'm going to try and get it equal. So I'm watching the weld go grind back until it licks the face of this, and then I'm going to keep moving along. I'm going to do that on both sides until I get a nice kind of blade edge. And what I want to try and do is do that with every single corner. If I find that the weld hasn't quite filled up enough, I will fill that again with the welder and then grind it back again. If I try to grind it down, It just makes everything kind of rounded, and in my opinion it doesn't look quite as good as it's meant to look. But anyway, watch me just grind this bit and then you get a good idea of how everything else will get ground. So I don't know if you can see that, but that's the kind of crisp edge we're trying to create. Now at the top here I've actually got a little bit of underfill, you can see there. So I might just add a few spots of weld across that and then regrind it back so I get it all nice and equal. So I'm also trying to check the centre line as well, making sure that that is grinding equally on both sides, making a nice straight line. Alright, so I've skipped ahead a little bit and I've got a lot of the sanding already done now. So you can see I've really wanted to crisp up these edges, get the definition looking right. All of these details will look really cool by the time it's done. So worth remembering, I haven't welded in here, and there are a few other points where I haven't welded either because I know that getting a grind or anything in there will be really difficult. Some places I have welded it where it's still difficult to get a grinder in, but places like here where the head meets the neck, the eye socket and some of the other details I'm going to have to do now with a 1mm cutting disc. Right, so I've got to inform you of something. Right, so to get in places like the eye, I've been using these tungsten carbide die grinder bits. This is an old one, I just thought I'd use it as an example. Using it in the drill, just not good enough. The drill doesn't produce enough RPMs. These are meant to spin at 20,000 RPM. My die grinder, which does spin at that speed, had broken, so I quickly bought another one. Turns out this was an excellent deal. Really cheap, 240 watts of power. It's a keyed chuck and it comes with a little key with a little key holder, and it's an adjustable speed, which is excellent. I'm amazed at how quickly this eats metal. It ate through it so much that I actually went through the eye sockets. So I had to re-weld them, and now I'm about to go through them again. So I thought I'd just show you how this does. Because I recommend this, I've put a link in the description if you want one, as well as all the other consumable bits. I'm honestly super happy with this purchase, but watch this. Alright, so this won't be sped up at all. This will be real footage. I might chop it so it's shorter so you can see the before and after without getting too bored. I mean, that did that in no time at all. I'm so pleased with it. One word of advice though, if you do get one of these, is get some really good safety spectacles and potentially a face shield. The only reason I'm not wearing a face shield myself is because I've destroyed mine rebuilding my air respirator. But I've been to the doctors a few times to get shards of metal out of my eye, and this is a culprit for it, doing stuff like that. And it's not a fun job. Having needles plucking them out your eyes is horrible. But if you're careful and you do it right, oh, it's a brilliant tool to have. So now I've been over most of it with the 36 grit. I'm now going to use the die grinder with some 60 grit rotary sanders, and I'm going to try and keep a nice even grain all the way through if I can. After that, I will use the polycarbide on my drill. This is you've got to take special note of the RPM ratings of these things. This is no good to go in a die grinder. These are actually rated at 19,000 RPM, so you've got to reduce your revs a little bit. But anyway, let me show you how I finish this. So I think that's the kind of finish that I want to get on all of it now. And you could go through a lot more higher grits than this and get it to almost like a polished look, but for me I'm gonna do a special finish on top of this, and it doesn't actually need to be that smooth. I think just a 60 grit alone is good enough. I think this has gone up to 80 grit now. Anyway, I'll do the rest and then I'll show you the final results. And so there you go, that's it all finished now. So I'll do another video on doing the finishes itself. But a bonus update for you here, I'm doing a Longhorn steer almost straight after this now. But I want you to let me know what sculptures you'd like me to do, because by popular vote, I will go with what the masses want. But something to look forward to very soon, I've got an induction forge that I'm going to be doing a review on. I've got a 16-ton pipe bender that I'm going to do a review on as well also. And in the background I've been developing a really simple DIY plasma table. So you'll be able to cut out all your own parts just like this. But anyway, let me know your thoughts, and until next time, happy forging a life worth living. See you in the next episode. Bye bye.